This time on combat ships. Pirates and galleons battle on the high seas. It was a time of seafaring legends.
Drake is one of the most effective navigators, as well as one of the most effective pirates ever seen in maritime history.
Of daring voyages and buccaneering raids.
It's dressed up as a voyage of exploration, a voyage to find new places, but it really is an attempt to go out and plunder the Spanish.
That would shape naval history and set the stage for one of the greatest sea battles of all.
The English, for the first time, can really bring their guns to bear and taking it in turns to pummel the Spanish ships.
The Spanish Armada. Combat ships. Fast. Effective.
The mission is pure James Bond espionage.
Deadly.
Japan is willing to throw the dice to engage just about every aspect of their military force in a climactic, decisive battle to stop the United States.
They have changed the world.
Warships have been key factors in global history, from the beginning of civilization to the present day.
Thanks to clever design, raw firepower, and the heroism of their crews. In the 16th century, large sailing ships ruled the seas. Daring sea captains had reached the New World and were bringing vast wealth back to Europe. The key player was Spain. It funneled riches from its new territories in the coastal regions of the Caribbean, known as the Spanish Main. Spain grew wealthy and powerful. England, on the other hand, ruled by Queen Elizabeth I, was small and weak. But English seafarers were determined not to miss out. Two in particular would leave their mark: Francis Drake and John Hawkins.
The English had not got to the Americas first. They had to break in. Hawkins sets the trend. He has his own fleet, essentially, of warships. So he is leading the way in the sea dog movement, if you want to call them that. One might call it the English piracy movement.
Francis Drake was Hawkins' second cousin and grew up with Hawkins' family. He, too, took to the sea. In 1562, Hawkins and Drake left Plymouth to enter a new, lucrative endeavor: the trade in human lives.
Enslaved people were seen as a product. There was no distinction between a cargo load of precious stones, a cargo load of exotic woods, and a cargo load of Africans. They all had the same emotional value.
From mines to plantations to household servants, Spain's colonies ran on slave labor.
The Spanish had run out of indigenous people to enslave and exploit, and were desperately looking for more.
So European merchant ships started bringing slaves from Africa to the Caribbean.
You have a situation where individuals would be removed from everything they knew, find themselves on board a slaving ship, pressed closely together, literally cheek by jowl. They would be in those conditions for up to a month, maybe more, crossing the Atlantic, after which they would be sold on into enforced servitude.
Spain controlled the trade and its profits. They only let other Catholic powers like Portugal join in. The Protestant English were excluded, but Hawkins and Drake wanted in. In 1562, they took 3 ships and hijacked a Portuguese slave vessel off the coast of Sierra Leone. Its cargo, over 300 enslaved Africans.
John Hawkins is fundamentally a pirate. he is seizing the opportunity to kidnap 300 people, most of whom he will sell in the Spanish Caribbean. Once Hawkins has returned from this first voyage, it's quite clear that this is an eminently profitable enterprise.
They were the first Englishmen to deal in the slave trade, a fact masked by their later triumphs. The promise of huge returns led many to invest in Hawkins' future voyages, including the Queen herself.
Elizabeth I went as far as not simply investing in Hawkins' future voyages, but supplying a ship, a 700-ton ship, the Jesus of Lubeck.
The Jesus of Lubeck was a remnant of the Old English Navy, a carrack. These were the versatile merchant and combat ships Europeans used to make the long voyages to the New World and beyond, from the 14th to early 16th century. They were large ships with wide hulls built more for storage than speed. With his new flagship, Hawkins made a second slave voyage with even bigger profits. But his venture was about to come to a halt. In September 1568, on his third slaving voyage, Hawkins with 5 vessels took the port of San Juan de Ulua, near Veracruz, Mexico. To their surprise, a Spanish fleet of galleons arrived soon after. Galleons were Spain's newest and strongest combat ships. Their streamlined hulls and lower forecastle solved the carrack's speed and steering problems, and they were built to fight. The new hull shape made them a more stable platform for artillery, while high stern castles still gave soldiers an advantage in close combat. Hawkins and his fleet were outclassed and outnumbered, but his men controlled the port's shore batteries, so the English and Spanish agreed on a truce.
It's in the interests of both sides not to push things to a conclusion too quickly, but the Spaniards certainly decided that they would do something about it while the English were here before they could get away. Therefore, they take over the shore batteries, they have the guns in their ships, and they open fire on the English.
Breaking the truce, the Spanish soldiers stormed aboard the English ships.
This is a typical mixed capability battle of the time. The key factors are boarding a ship, entering it, fighting on board with swords and small arms and so on. As well, artillery is used to soften up the enemy.
The Spanish overwhelmed the English. Only 2 ships narrowly escaped, Drake on one, Hawkins on the other.
The English lose the Jesus of Lubeck. There was actually a royal ship. This was a officially sponsored illegal slaving expedition, and the Spanish are showing, look, this is our territory, stop it.
The Spanish galleons had made a powerful statement.
The attack at Veracruz is something that nobody who was present ever forgot. As far as Hawkins was concerned, the Spanish had broken their word, they were untrustworthy, they were not gentlemen, and therefore they could be treated with contempt.
Hawkins and Drake fled back to England. The experience was enough to convince Hawkins to retire from his career as a sea dog. But he encouraged Drake to take revenge on the Spanish as a privateer.
In a nutshell, a privateer is a sanctioned pirate, is a pirate that has the blessings of government and officialdom.
Drake's blessing came from Queen Elizabeth. Privateers were privately owned combat ships. They were a low-risk way to antagonize and weaken her rival, the Spanish king, Philip II, without declaring war.
These privateers like Drake are often the Caribbean raiding the Spanish, but when the Spanish come and complain about it, the Queen can almost say, well, no, they're not doing it with my permission. Nobody really believes this, but she has this kind of deniability.
The charade maintained a fragile peace, even as privateers like Drake plundered Spanish ships.
Drake is highly aggressive against the Spanish. He takes a lot of prizes from them. He makes a lot of money from acting as a licensed predator.
Drake would make millions in today's money from his raids in the Caribbean. His legend as a fearsome pirate was growing. The Spanish gave him a nickname, El Drake, the Dragon. He was a marked man, and he was about to cement it with one of the greatest voyages in history. In the 1570s, Francis Drake took revenge for the Spanish ambush at Veracruz by stealing their treasure. His cousin John Hawkins sought to get even in a very different way. With tensions between Spain and England building, England needed a strong navy. Hawkins ensured it had one.
The navy that Hawkins inherits is in a stage of evolution. There's a relatively small number of quite old ships. So the idea is to build up a core navy of a decent number of ships.
Together with master shipbuilders, Hawkins designed a new type of vessel, a combat ship that would play to England's strengths and take on the powerful Spanish galleons that had beaten him at Veracruz.
Hawkins is able to draw on his experience as a privateer in terms of how the Elizabethan Navy can advance. So he understands the advantages of faster ships, of having more cannon on board a ship to stand off and bombard an enemy.
The result? The race-built galleon. A lean, fast, and maneuverable ship armed with powerful guns. Hawkins sought the best shipwrights in the country to help perfect the concept. The most influential of these was Matthew Baker.
So Matthew Baker was one of the great shipwrights of the Tudor period. And what we have here is his document that he put together really over his lifetime, thinking about how ships could be better designed, how they could be more maneuverable, how they could be more efficient.
Baker based his designs on mathematical and natural principles.
Well, one of the most famous and important images in the book is found here. And it's an image of a ship which, slightly unusually, has a fish superimposed on the hull of the ship. And it looks really quite surreal. Why did Matthew Baker draw it in this way? If you can replicate the shape of the fish cutting through the water, you've got both a natural but also a proportionate way of responding to the need for speed.
Compared to the original galleons, which were also used as transport vessels, the English race-built galleons were purebred combat ships. They were leaner and even more streamlined. Their bow was more tapered, and the whole ship was angled into the water to cut through the waves.
The term race is an interesting one because it's serendipitous, that it suggests speed, but it really means cut down or raised to the ground, that use of the word. So it meant it was cut down from these very heavy poop decks and forecastles that had existed before.
On previous combat ships like the Carracks, these tall poop decks and forecastles served a very specific purpose.
The tactics used by these ships were relatively simple. You fired the heavy guns maybe once. You then got alongside the enemy ship, launched your infantry on board, and captured it sword in hand. Basically, land fighting on ships.
Traditionally, being able to attack or defend from higher platforms was a huge advantage. With only a small army, this type of battle didn't favor the English. Instead, they wanted well-trained gun crews to fight enemy ships at a distance with effective cannon fire.
By taking the control of the guns away from the soldiers and giving it to the sailors, they could develop a ship which could use its heavy guns as its primary armament.
Sitting lower in the water and thus less top-heavy, the race-built design was a stable platform for heavy guns along the whole length of the ship, including the bow and stern chasers. In 1577, Hawkins was made treasurer of the English Navy, giving him more power to build up the fleet. In the same year, Francis Drake proposed a daring plan to Queen Elizabeth. He wanted to sail to the Pacific.
It's dressed up as a voyage of exploration, a voyage to find new places, but it really is an attempt to go out and plunder the Spanish.
Having raided the Spanish Main, he now wanted to rob Spain's less defended Pacific territories. Queen Elizabeth was only too happy to support a voyage that would demonstrate England's naval power. But getting to the Pacific, much less back, was no easy feat.
When Drake's mission left Plymouth Harbour, it had a small fleet of 5 ships, and across those 5 ships was spread roughly 160 men, and the flagship was a ship called the Pelican, which later became known as the Golden Hind.
A replica of the Golden Hind sits in the heart of London. It was launched in 1973, and today is being painstakingly restored and made seaworthy once again. This ship was an early race-built galleon, incorporating some of the new design principles. At 150 tons, the Golden Hind was not a big vessel. In such a small ship, with only wind to power it, Drake and his crew were about to undertake the most daring raids in history. They set sail from Plymouth on December 13th, 1577, and headed into the Atlantic. Drake's crews now faced weeks without sight of land, with only crude tools to navigate.
So this is called the chip log, and it's how they would have measured speed in the 16th century. So it's quite a simple device, really. You take this triangular piece of wood, and you throw it over the side of the ship into the sea. And because of the way it's tied, it's got a uniform drag, which means as the ship leaves it behind, this rope starts to unravel, and you turn over a sand timer that measures 30 seconds. And in that 30 seconds, you're going to be counting how many of these knots pass through your hand. The idea is you know how far apart the knots are spaced, so you can do distance divided by time, and that gives you your speed. And this is where we get the idea of knots from, which we still measure nautical speed in today.
These long voyages were perilous. Disease was often more dangerous than combat.
They did their utmost to keep these ships clean. Diseases like dysentery could spread like wildfire if sailors weren't careful.
With no toilets on the ship, sailors had to improvise.
So if you wanted to go to the toilet and you're a 16th century sailor, you'd have to climb down here onto the beakhead and squat down, do your business into the sea between the slatted planks. And then you're going to pull up a rope. It's been bobbing up and down in the water, so it's nice and wet, and you're going to use that as toilet paper to wipe yourself clean. That rope goes back down into the sea. Next sailor comes along, and sharing is caring. In the 16th century, it's exactly the same rope. And this is called a tow rag. So if anyone's ever called you a dirty tow rag, they're calling you a pooey rope on the front of a 16th century ship.
The main problem with such long stretches at sea was scurvy.
Scurvy is caused by lack of vitamin C, so lack of fresh fruit and vegetables, and it's really hard to preserve food on a ship like this for months. Scurvy is a really nasty illness. Your skin can't host collagen, so all of the scar tissue that you've had over your life begins to open up and seep. Your teeth can drop out, your hair goes brittle and can snap off, you hallucinate, you have fevers, and you do eventually die from it.
The loss of men from illness forced Drake to scuttle 2 of the smaller ships, reducing his fleet to 3. After 63 days, Drake finally reached South America. The remaining ships made their way down the Patagonian coast and into the Strait of Magellan. In September 1578, Drake became the first English captain to reach the Pacific. Instantly, his ships were hit by a fierce storm. Francis Fletcher, chaplain to the expedition, wrote,
God, by contrary wind and intolerable tempest, seemed to set himself against us, forcing us to alter our course and determination.
The storm lasted 2 months. One ship sank, and another raced back into the Strait of Magellan to escape to England.
So eventually Drake and his ship, the Pelican, which he renames the Golden Hind, is the only ship left. It's really once Drake is on his own with just the Golden Hind that the real treasure taking and plundering really kicks off.
Drake was about to unleash his new combat ship on the unsuspecting Spanish. In late 1578, the English privateer Francis Drake sailed up the Pacific coast of South America. After a year at sea, he was ready to plunder. This was Spanish territory, but it was virtually unguarded.
The reason that Spain's possessions in the Americas were so undefended is because they didn't think that other Europeans would even risk it. It was such a perilous voyage to get round into the Pacific.
Drake could pillage to his heart's content. He raided ports all along the coast of modern-day Chile and Peru.
He starts with a small Spanish town called Valparaiso, and in December 1578, he enters the port, and the Spanish don't really know what's going on. They think it must be a Spanish ship. They're not expecting Drake to arrive, so they actually send out a drum boat to drum the Golden Hind to salute. The English kind of can't believe their luck, and the Spanish town surrenders. They give up, and the English help themselves to gold and silver.
At the next port of El Callao, Drake hears of a Spanish galleon laden with treasure, the Nuestra Señora de la Concepción. She had only left the port 2 weeks earlier. The Nuestra Señora was a traditional galleon. Only this one's main purpose was the transportation of precious cargo.
They're effectively unarmed because they're not expecting this kind of challenge from other Europeans in the Pacific.
By March 1st, 1579, the faster race-built Golden Hind had caught up. Drake drew up his plan of attack. It was based on deception.
Drake's tactics for capturing the Nuestra Señora are classic piracy. Basically, you take the victim by surprise, and he did this by putting barrels behind the Golden Hind and slowing her down, so it appeared that she was under sail but going slowly, therefore she was a heavily laden local cargo ship.
Drake's plan worked. The Spanish ship slowed and the Golden Hind pulled alongside. The Spanish captain, San Juan de Anton, later testified.
As they boarded the ship, they shot 2 charges of heavy artillery, one of which carried off the mizzenmast.
This is important, because when you're taking a treasure ship as a privateer, you don't want to sink it, because then the treasure and the ship go all the way to the bottom of the ocean. Instead, you want to knock out the masts and the sails and stop it from moving.
From up high on the fighting tops, Drake's men unleashed another weapon from their arsenal, the musket.
Most sailing ships of that period would be having a store of muskets on board. And the point of the musket is to be used to try and clear the decks of your opponents as ships got closer together.
The technology was simple. In essence, it worked the same way as a cannon.
To fire a matchlock musket, you first have to load it. The musket itself would be supplied with several pre-weighed black powder charges, and they would be poured down the muzzle of the musket, followed by the musket ball. So now we're going to put our measured amount of powder down the barrel and the lead shot down as well. And now I'm going to ram all of that home with the ramrod, like so. A small charge of black powder is put into that powder pan and covered up to keep it safe. Then we have a lit match here. That's put into the cock of the mechanism here. And then when you want to fire the musket, you expose the priming powder and fire.
The gun's bark was worse than its bite.
It's not designed to be an accurate sniping rifle type of weapon. The reason being, it's firing a lead round shot. There'll be heavy spots within this round ball. It's also not a perfect sphere. If we were to roll this across the floor, it would go in all kinds of directions. And it does exactly that when you fire the musket. It doesn't fly in a straight line. You have to put blocks of men together, all firing at the same time. And then when you have 10, 15, 20 shot going in one direction, you've got a chance of hitting what you're trying to shoot at.
Fired down onto the Spanish deck, the onslaught had its desired effect, as Captain de Anton would testify.
They discharged many muskets and entered the ship. As we did not carry artillery or arms, we could not make any resistance.
Drake and his men boarded and emptied the holds. One of his crew, Francis Pretty, wrote,
We found in her great riches, as jewels and precious stones, 13 chests full of plate, 80 pound weight of gold, and 26 ton of silver.
With his hold now full of treasure, Drake set sail for home.
He then sails across the Pacific Ocean to the Spice Islands, loads up on spices, and then travels the 9,700 miles non-stop all the way to Sierra Leone before doing the final leg of his journey back to England.
The Golden Hind landed in Plymouth on September 26, 1580, with 59 surviving crew. They had been at sea for 1,020 days. It was only the second time a ship had circumnavigated the globe.
It's easy at some levels to dismiss the circumnavigation as just a plunder raid, but I think it's important that we don't forget how exceptional this was.
And this is one of the great achievements of maritime history. And to see the size of the ship, this little ship, sailing all the way around the world, this demonstrates the achievement of Francis Drake, one of the greatest English seamen of all time.
The treasure he returned with is estimated to have been worth $74 million in today's money. The majority went to his delighted investor, Queen Elizabeth.
In piracy, he made one of the greatest successes ever in sailing around the world and making a profit of 4,700% on the initial investment, which the Queen was an investor, so he got a knighthood.
Having taken his revenge on the Spanish, Sir Francis Drake, the ex-slaver and pirate, settled down. He went into politics, becoming mayor of Plymouth and a member of Parliament. But Drake's days of fighting the Spanish were not over. In the late 1580s, the tensions between Catholic Spain and Protestant England began to boil over. In 1587, Queen Elizabeth decided to support Dutch Protestant rebels in the Spanish-held Netherlands. King Philip had had enough. He ordered the formation of an invasion armada.
King Philip II of Spain has the greatest army in the world at this point in time, and from his perspective, he has the ability to come in here and deal with the English problem if he can get the troops on the ground.
The Armada would carry them there. England knew its small army was no match for the Spanish.
There was an increasing likelihood of an invasion from the continent, and the only effective defense against that would be a powerful navy.
For the past 27 years, John Hawkins had been building just that. Now the new Navy Royal assembled in Plymouth Harbor.
We're just coming out of Plymouth Harbour here, going into the Sound. So this is the area of the Catwater where the English ships would have been anchored just in July 1588.
They totaled nearly 200. Over 100 smaller vessels supported a core fighting force of 34 combat ships, including 13 modern race-built galleons. Commanding the fleet was Lord Howard of Effingham. Alongside him, John Hawkins and Francis Drake. No longer mere privateers, but admirals of the Queen's Navy Royal. They were ready for the Spanish.
The English have a strong fleet. These are experienced captains, experienced sailors who've been fighting the Spanish for a long time. They have every confidence in their abilities.
Drake took command of the Royal race-built galleon, Revenge.
heavily armed, 20 large guns, 20 smaller ones, and is probably one of the best gun-armed fighting ships in the world at the time.
On July 19, 1588, the Spanish Armada was sighted off Cornwall in the southwest of England.
The English have a system of beacons set up, so they have coast watchers who spot the Armada and light the beacons, and then they're lit all along the coast, and news comes to Plymouth that the Armada has been sighted.
The 130 Spanish vessels sailing in close formation were a terrifying sight. 40 were warships led by 22 galleons, carrying up to 40 guns. The rest were carracks, with their tall fighting decks, and Mediterranean-style oared combat ships called galleas. But most of the vessels were used for transport, carrying supplies, weapons, and troops for the invasion.
The Armada has roughly 30,000 men on board, but 22,000 or so of those are soldiers designed for fighting for when the army lands in England, and about 8,000 sailors.
The Spanish plan was to assemble an overwhelming invasion force.
The job of the Spanish fleet was to sail up the English Channel to reach the coast of Belgium and link up with an army.
This veteran Spanish force, led by the Duke of Parma, had another 16,000 men. The Armada was to collect them, cross the Channel, and march on London.
Lord Howard's plan is to stop at all costs the Spanish choosing an invasion site on the southern coast of England.
His ships sailed out and gave chase. Led by Drake's Revenge, they quickly caught up with the Spanish vessels.
But most of the ships are big and slow merchant ships, and the Spanish fleet, it's as fast as their slowest moving ship.
Spain's unarmed transport ships took cover in a crescent formation.
No one's quite sure of the tactics of how to beat this huge invasion fleet. The Spanish form into a huge crescent that's 7 miles from tip to tip, and it's got 2 horns on either end with its most powerful ships.
On July 21st, the English fleet engaged the Armada off Plymouth. Admirals Howard, Drake, and Hawkins adopted a tactic of constant harassment.
Most of the serious fighting on the English side is done by the Navy Royal, the large race-built galleons with high-quality brass cannon on board, skilled mariners in charge, and good crew. 15, 20, 25 ships do most of the work.
The advantage that England have in their race-built galleons is that they can fight and attack ships from a distance. The great advantage that the Spanish have is that if an English ship gets too close to them, their sheer size and the number of men on board means they could overwhelm an English ship. So they want to fight in 2 completely different ways. The Spanish close up, the English at a distance.
A fact not lost on Lord Howard. He wrote a letter to the Queen's secretary before the battle.
We dare not adventure amongst them, their fleet being so strong. But there shall nothing be either neglected or unhazarded that may work to overthrow them.
Drake and the other captains harassed the Spanish using a number of maneuvers. Historian and veteran sailor Brian Lavery has researched these tactics in detail, but has never seen them in action. Today, on a ship with comparable sails, he hopes to recreate these maneuvers.
We're now on board the training ship Royalist, which is run by the Sea Cadets. It's a square rigger, that's why we're interested in it, because essentially it's got the same kind of sails and rigging that the ships of the Spanish Armada at the time had.
Their huge speed advantage allowed the English to use hit-and-run tactics against the Spanish galleons.
Unfortunately, we don't have a Spanish galleon to attack at the moment, but we're going to practice on a red buoy, which is just over there.
Approaching from downwind, the English closed in on the Spanish ships.
We're quite close to the buoy now, and round about this point we fire the bow guns forward.
Still faster than the enemy, the English ships then pulled alongside the Spanish ships to unleash a broadside of cannons. This this is the most vulnerable moment for the English.
After that, a quick escape. Don't get tangled up with the Spanish ships. Don't get caught in their grappling hooks. If they can catch you, they can board you. That's the end of it for you.
As the attacker pulled away, the next English ship was lining up to do the same. With their speed, revenge, and the race-built galleons could fall back, reload, catch up, and repeat these attacks.
The Spanish don't have the ships that can engage with the English in high-speed operations. The English ships simply choose the range at which they wish to fight. The Spanish have to take whatever the English throw at them. And because they hold their stations, none of the Spanish ships break out of formation to seek battle. It's all about getting the fleet to rendezvous with the army.
Speed and maneuverability were only part of the equation. The superior English cannons also came into play.
Using slightly different gun technology to the Spanish. Namely, they've got four-wheeled truck carriages on their cannons, which makes them much easier to maneuver about their decks.
This simple development, four-wheel instead of two-wheel gun carriages, made all the difference.
What the English are able to do with their cannon is after it's fired, it comes back inboard on the carriage, and then they're able to clean the gun out and reload it from the front and then roll it back out to fire it again. Whereas the Spanish cannon, once they're loaded, they're tied in place and you can only fire them once in an action. It's not possible to easily reload it.
These one-sided attacks gave the English the early advantage. But while damage was done, the Spanish lost only 2 ships. The battle was not yet won. The Spanish king, Philip II, had sent a huge armada to depose his rival, Queen Elizabeth of England. On July 27, 1588, they reached Calais. Over 100 Spanish ships now sat only 20 miles from the English coast. They were preparing to transport 36,000 troops across the Channel.
The Spanish anchor at Calais while they wait for Parma to get his men ready to get onto the troop barges to sail across to England.
If they could get their 2 armies across the Channel, England would fall. To prevent this, the English fleet would have to strike now. In the early hours of July 29th, they took action.
When the Spanish fleet has anchored in Calais for protection, the ships are all quite close together. Drake, Hawkins and Howard, they decide to use fire ships to attack the Spanish.
A fire ship is a not very valuable, smallish vessel on your side that you fill with combustible materials and explosives, and you sail it downwind into the enemy anchorage, where it creates huge confusion.
8 burning ships were steered toward the anchored Spanish fleet.
At night in Calais, all of a sudden it must have been terrifying to see these ships on fire coming towards you.
One Spanish sailor later recalled,
"At midnight, the enemy set adrift, with their sails set and the tide in their favor. 8 ships which came towards us all in flames, burning furiously in the bows."
And this causes absolute chaos among the Spanish fleet.
The Spanish had to evade the fire ships. Hauling the anchors would take too long. There was no choice. They had to cut their anchor ropes.
Everybody heads off looking to save his ship, and they head off in different directions. The Spanish fleet now does not exist. It's just a collection of ships spread across the sea, each one of which is now vulnerable to being attacked.
Drake and the other race-built galleons pounced just off the coast of Gravelines.
This is the point where the English sail into closer quarters and start to really do damage to the Spanish ships. This is the decisive phase of the battle.
The English, for the first time, can really bring their guns to bear and use those maneuvers of sailing in close to the Spanish ships, firing with their bows, turning to fire broadside, turning to fire from their stern guns, taking it in turns to pummel the Spanish ships. This is how they wanted to fight from the beginning.
Back on the Royalist, the complexity of these maneuvers becomes clear.
This time, we're going to fire all the guns. We're going to fire guns on 4 different sides. We're going to fire everything we've got this time. We'll have to do a 360-degree turn to do that, which is quite a difficult thing to do in a sailing ship. It takes a good deal of seamanship skill to do that.
This time, a moving dinghy stands in as a Spanish ship.
First of all, we're going to fire the bow guns.
The English ship then pulled alongside the Spanish vessel, ready to unleash a broadside.
Now we fire the guns one by one as we come alongside them.
The English then turned into the wind to fall behind the Spanish.
Now we're going to turn to port, we're going to turn over that way. Then we'll get into position to fire the guns on the other side.
These maneuvers were being executed in a hectic battle, with ships everywhere.
But these battles are fought at frighteningly close quarters. You can have conversations with the enemy ship. We're talking about that close. So the Spanish shout at the English that they're chicken because they're not getting close enough. You can taunt and shout at your opponents. From the English point of view, don't get too close or you will immediately lose your advantage.
After firing the bow, port, and starboard guns, there was one set of cannons still to fire.
The only thing we have left now is the stern guns, and that involves getting the wind behind us.
As the Spanish galleon pulled away, the English ships caught the wind and looped around into position.
Now he's dead astern of us. We can fire the guns over there, and that will be our last shot for now. We're going to withdraw now and reload the guns and decide whether to come back again.
Using these tactics, Drake and Hawkins wreaked havoc. The Spanish sailor recalled,
The enemy then opened a heavy artillery fire on our flagship at 7 o'clock in the morning, which continued for 9 hours. So tremendous was the fire that over 200 bolts struck the sails and hull of the flagship on the starboard side, killing and wounding many men, disabling and dismounting 3 guns, and destroying much rigging.
The Battle of Gravelines is a pivotal moment in the Armada campaign. From this moment on, the Armada is doomed. There is no chance of ever landing a force in England.
The Armada had failed. Only 6 ships were lost to direct combat action. But the fleet was dispersed, driven from Calais and unable to recover its mission. Sir Francis Drake wrote to Queen Elizabeth about their victory.
Certain it is that many of their people were sick and not a few killed. Their ships, sails, ropes and masts needeth great reparations, for that they had all felt your majesty's force.
What they did do, they kept the Spanish Armada under constant pressure. There never was a moment when they could relax, they couldn't regroup, they couldn't reorganize. There was no chance of them attempting any landings along the English coast.
The English had the right ships, commanded by experienced leaders who had the ideal tactics.
These tactics, although they've been used in privateering battles and things like that, for a big naval battle, this was completely unprecedented. Now you're talking about naval battles being fought from further away, matching firepower across 2 opposing ships.
On July 30th, 1588, the surviving Spanish ships tried to escape home by sailing around the north of Scotland. But many perished in strong winds on the Irish coast. With no anchors, they could not take shelter.
So the weather completes what is an English tactical victory and turns it into a strategic success. So a lot of Spanish ships don't come back. It's a shattering blow to the prestige of the Spanish Empire.
Of the 130 ships that set sail, only 67 returned. 20,000 Spanish soldiers and sailors died. For the English, the victory would define their future.
The Armada is the foundation myth of English identity. It's an event which defines the way they will see the world for all time.
And that myth feeds the generations. And the heroes of the Armada, like Drake and Hawkins, become figures to live up to. And that England sees its future as taking on the world, taking on bigger powers by using the spirit of the Armada.
After their great victory, Francis Drake and John Hawkins continued to battle the Spanish. Hawkins joined Drake on a raid in 1595, but died off the coast of Puerto Rico. His cousin Drake would succumb to dysentery only 2 months later. Drake was buried at sea off the coast of Panama, leaving behind a controversial but incredible legacy.
For all of his misgivings in terms of his effective piracy, in terms of his ruthless ambition, and the extent to which he was a wayfarer for English imperialism, it's hard not to admire Drake's seamanship and remark upon the fact that he really was a fantastic mariner.
The success of the race-built galleons inspired the next generation of combat ships, such as the frigates of the 17th century, even faster, more powerful vessels. But for that crucial moment in history, when England's fate was at stake, they were the ultimate combat ship.